Well, there's certainly been a variety of stories, hasn't there, as we've gone through the first portion of the book of Daniel. And Daniel does divide almost equally in halves. The first half has to do with a number of rather attention-grabbing situations, stories, historical narrative, you can call it what you will, that, do teach eternal truths. First off, he was captured by a foreign army and deported to a foreign land, and as far as we know, never returned to his homeland. He wound up in the second chapter interpreting a rather strange dream under very weird circumstances when somebody tells you, tell me what I'm thinking and what it means. And you go, whoa, really? That's a challenge. It's, if you let me know what you're thinking, then I can invent something, and that's what the soothsayers, magicians, and so forth, what we call the wise men, that's what they were involved with. And they said, there is no natural way any human being could come up with an accurate interpretation. But Daniel, of course, had a supernatural way of interpreting because he'd been given that gift by God himself. And then there are, of course, feeding, as it were, the next step, the next part of the story. In chapter 3, you have the image that Nebuchadnezzar sets up on the plains outside of the city of Babylon. But this time, of course, it's all him and the bowing down, and you wind up with the fiery furnace of his friends that were committed to standing fast in the sight of idolatry. Chapter 4 has always been, to me, one of the fascinating chapters of Scripture, one of many. But here you have the conversion testimony of the dictator of the world. Not just any foreign pagan worshiping idolatrous type of individual, but this guy at the time was in fact the world dictator for all practical purposes of the known world. And he came to know the Most High God and testified of that situation. We'll see how that factors in today's text in just a couple of moments. In chapter 5 that we looked at last Lord's Day, we saw the fall of an impregnable fortress and how God in all of these things is sovereign in the affairs of men. Men make their best efforts, to fortify Babylon, to depict an image, to take captive and control. You can pick one out. Heat the furnace 7 times hotter. God is not exactly controlled, is he? And we need to be thankful for that. Mankind puts forth his most powerful methods of dealing with whatever he faces, and God comes by, and kind of like what Psalm 2 indicates, he laughs in derision at what kings try to accomplish. So a lot of that and more that has fit in there. And when we begin dealing with palace intrigue, we find no better place to turn to than Daniel chapter 6. It's kind of a combination of politics and hungry lions. You'll see a lot of similarities, I'm sure, to what the history of nations, including our own, has been and is in some cases, with the manipulations, the intrigue, and of course Daniel's miraculous delivery, once again showing that God is sovereign, on this time in the realm of nature and in the realm of political deliverance. God is capable of overriding anything mankind can come up with. The setting is found in the first 3 verses of chapter 6. Follow along with me as we familiarize ourselves with that. It says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which would be over the entire kingdom, and over these were 3, King James word is presidents, governors, of whom Daniel was first, meaning chief amongst the three, that the princes might give accounts to them, and the king should have no damage. In other words, let these guys take care of the work. Then this Daniel was preferred above the other governors and princes because he had an excellent spirit, and the king thought to set him over the entire realm. Well, just a pause for a moment as we launch into this, because verse 1 brings our attention back to this guy by the name of Darius. And I know we normally pronounce it Darius, but that is a Western European pronunciation, not the Hebrew. This was a title. We saw him introduced, of course, in chapter 5 with the Medo-Persian Empire conquering Babylon and the Babylonian Empire in total within that time frame. His actual name apparently was Gubaru. I know that's not something you would probably even name a pet salamander, but you know, that was his name. Cyrus was the empire's ruler. Darius was the title given to Gubaru, who headed up the army that conquered the city of Babylon, and he essentially was the sub-ruler within the Babylonian area of the Medo-Persian Empire. What you see here then is in a picture that is recorded for us that there is a new order that comes with the new kingdom, the new dynasty. There's a new administrative alignment. Within these 120, which were the amount of provinces out there, you had a tier above them. You could maybe split them into 40, 40, 40, and you had three guys who had even more authority than the governors of the 120. And chief amongst them, the one who was in charge of Babylon itself, the city and the immediate province, as well as those other areas, when we don't know if it was 40, 40, 40 or split up some other way, was Daniel himself. Rather impressive when you think about it. You wonder why Darius would choose this Jewish exile and bring him essentially out of retirement and put him in charge of the Babylonian Empire in modern-day Iraq. He must have had a reputation. Darius must have done a little bit of background checking and a little bit of trying to figure out who the best guys for this job of the big three was going to be. And then he goes and picks this guy, a Jewish guy. And you don't know whether it's like a slap in the face for the conquered Babylonians, or exactly what his thought processes were, but it does cause some issues. Number one, jealousy. Okay? Daniel is elevated over and above hundreds, if not thousands, of men who were administrators under the old regime of Belshazzar. And beyond that, going back, the previous generations. Now, Daniel was, if we are going to give him, as indicated, somewhere between 15 and 20 years old when he was exiled, when he was taken captive in 605 BC. Darius here conquers with the Medo-Persian Empire and puts them into power in 539. When you come out and do the math, you find then at this point Daniel's somewhere between 76 and 80 years old. Okay? Why is he chosen specifically? The reason that is recorded in Scripture is Darius recognizes an, quote, excellent spirit, end quote. Here's a top-notch, cream of the crop, the pick of the litter type of administrator that is familiar with the Babylonian Empire, and now they are installing a new administration. You don't throw out all the proven commodity if you're bright. You install them in positions where they can continue to excel administratively, because that's for the benefit of the new Medo-Persian regime, isn't it? If you think about it at all. But that excellent spirit implies some type of special enablement. I'm sure it didn't take any great effort for Darius, or Gubru, I'll call him Darius, I don't like Gubru any better than you do, for Darius to hear the history of Daniel, going clear back to the interpretation of dreams under Nebuchadnezzar, clear back to dealing with images and testifying and administrating for Nebuchadnezzar during his mental insanity for those 7 years and so forth. All of that and more perhaps indicates that he recognized some type of divine or supernatural enablement, capability, some type of characteristic that caused Daniel to excel. And he was just smart enough as a ruler, the new guy, to tap into good resource, good material. Bring the guy on board that can get the job done, okay, for a variety of things. One other thought, okay? I won't ask for a show of hands on those that consider themselves to be retirement age. Okay? Daniel certainly fits that, and apparently he was kind of shuffled off or put out to pasture under Belshazzar. The guy wanted to go back to the old Babylonian way of worship and pagan idolatry, where Nebuchadnezzar, you remember in chapter 4, essentially had walked away from that pagan idolatry, the worship of Marduk and so forth. Marduk was the chief Babylonian god, and had professed that the God of Israel was indeed the Most High God, the everlasting God, the all-powerful God, and indicated that that God, the God of the Jews, was his God. Okay? Yeah, all that and more. Okay? Our idea of retirement is kind of a Western European construct that has been taken to the nth degree by the American culture over the last 100 years or so. Yeah, now, I'm not knocking or trying to overlook the diminishing physical capabilities and so forth. Most of us at some time, by the time we get to be 85 or 90, can no longer be firemen. Okay? I mean, there's a reason for that. You know, they don't want to have to cart you out along with everybody else. So yeah, I'm not saying that, but stop and think about how many people, even Christians in the church, conclude that they can or should or need to retire from service to God at some predetermined age. This, by the way, is very common in the pastorate. Okay? There are organizations that I know of one that is still, it's in faith, used to be AMF when I served with it, that when you hit 60, when you hit 60 years of age, you would mandatory retirement from full-time active ministry with their organization. I always felt that they were wasting some of the best years. You're supposed to hopefully get smarter as you get older. Until all the plug comes out and the brains leak out of the back of your head and you no longer can function. But why not take advantage, of all of those years of experience and everything that goes with them? I mean, how do you get experience? Primarily by doing things wrong. And then you got to fix it, and then you learn, hopefully you learn from all of that, so the next time you don't do dumb quite as badly or in the same manner as you did previously, okay? Wow. You simply can't find the concept of retiring from God, retiring from service, retiring from being everything God wants you to be anywhere in the Bible. It's simply not found. Again, I'm not talking about you need to make adjustments, you need to maybe step out of the fast lane on the freeway into a slower lane, but we still need to be heading towards heaven, serving as we go. So keep that in mind. Well, we have what amounts to a political setup found in the next few verses, beginning in verse 4. The presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. They couldn't find they couldn't find it. Nope, they looked. They said, we'll find something. Maybe he's, taking money on the sly. Maybe he's lining his own pockets. Maybe he's got an island where he flies presidents to, type of thing. All that. But no, they couldn't find anything like it. For he was faithful, and there was no fault or error found in him. Okay? Then these men said, we're not going to find dirt on him that way. He said, we're going to have to figure out how we can find something with his old religion. Okay? Against the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said, King Darius, live forever. Nothing like, ladling a little butter on top of the bread here. All the presidents of the kingdom, governors, the princes, counselors, captains have consulted together. That's a lie, by the way, because they didn't consult with Daniel, and he was one of those top guys. And they've come together, and we want to establish a royal statute to make a firm decree that whoever shall ask any petition of any god or man for the next 30 days, save of you, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree, sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not, cannot be changed. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Okay. Well, there's several things going on here. We've already mentioned jealousy, and that seems to be a driving issue. Also recognize you have here an Old Testament, blatant Old Testament example of anti-Semitism. And that's going to come out very clearly here in just a few more verses. They don't like this guy. He's not one of us. He's Jewish, for crying out loud. He's not one of, he doesn't even play golf with us. This guy just doesn't fit. And now he's elevated over us. Let's dig up some dirt on him. Can't find it. Okay? Can't find it. He just, the more they dig on it, he just doesn't have anything for them to jump out and say, aha, look at what that guy's doing. Look what he's been. He's on the take, or he's got a mistress in Italy or something. It's not there. Okay? So they say, well, we know he's really religious. Being a Jew and that whole Jewish God thing. And we know his background just like everybody else, and his testimony to Nebuchadnezzar and perverting the Nebuchadnezzar from the Babylonian religion. What's he do that we can, so they manipulate, and how do they do that? Well, they appeal to the king, don't they? They've got a technique here, okay, that they are looking at. If you can't find fault in a person's actions or character, then trap them in their own integrity. Wow. That's essentially what they're doing. And this guy's committed to his God. Daniel's got the excellent spirit that is recognized throughout the kingdom, but we're going to have to take him down. How are we going to do it? Well, he's committed to his God. Let's find a way to do this. And how the scheme, Darius, there must have been like some vanity, maybe, is suggested, or an ego. Darius has just been guru, has very recently captured the city and done this for Cyrus the king, and has received an elevation of his own position within the Medo-Persian Empire and so forth, everything that goes with that. And he must have felt that, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. And these guys come by and say, well, we think this is good. If anybody prays to anybody except you for the next month, throw them to the lions. Because obviously the appeal is, you're really something special, Darius. Look what you've accomplished, and now you're the head guy. You get the idea. Just stroke his feathers the right direction. Let him see what happens. Now, this whole thing with the Medo-Persian culture concerning the king's decrees, Persian laws, the decrees, you read it the same way, were irrevocable. Okay? Once the king signed it into law, and why was this? Well, because they were considered to be divinely inspired. When the king put something into law by signing it, that was a statement that since he could not make a mistake, equality with deity, and so any infraction against a decree was open rebellion against God, the God of the empire. See how that works? Yeah, okay, you get the idea. All right, let's talk about then the portion that Tim read to us just a few moments ago, beginning in verse 10, and we'll talk about integrity and commitment and a refusal to bow down to secular convention when it's in opposition to God, beginning in verse 10. It says, when Daniel knew, he heard about that the writing had been signed, he went to his house, his windows being open in his chamber towards Jerusalem, kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, prayed and gave thanks before his God, just like he had before time. These men assembled and found Daniel praying at the actual, by the way, the Hebrew word there translated assembled means they rushed. They rushed to spy upon. They just stumbled over each other getting there to get, and notice Daniel leaves the windows open. He doesn't shut or anything. They found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. They came near, spoke before the king concerning the king's decree, and they notice how they start this. They come into the king's presence and they said, did you not sign a decree that every man that asks any petition of any god or man within 30 days, except from you, O king, will be cast into the den of lions? And so he's got to say yes because he just signed the puppy. The king answered and said, that's true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, and you can't alter it. You cannot alter a law. There was no changing it, modifying a law or decree. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah. And you can't trust those Jews. Like I said, anti-Semitism, along with a hearty dose of jealousy and political intrigue, trying to eliminate somebody they see as a threat, that you could go on and plug several other things in there. He said, he does not regard you, O king. He doesn't regard the decree you signed. He's continuing to pray 3 times a day. They know that because they ran right over there, with their trusty home recording. They whipped out their smartphones and they've got it right there, and hit record. It's got the little date thing on the bottom, so that they've got all that. They take it into the courtroom. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. You get the impression of one distinct thing. He figured out he had just been manipulated. Now, at one level, you have to ask yourself, that doesn't really bode well in the long term for his relationship with the guys doing the manipulating. How many of you say, oh, I got manipulated so somebody else could get their way, and that's fine? Oh, no, you're not. You don't like being manipulated. It's not honest. It's not ethical. Okay? It can be counterproductive. It just is not a thing that we accept as something that is good and righteous. Just the opposite. And I dare say that the king here is sore displeased at himself because he says, yeah, they appealed to my vanity. I didn't think it through, and I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Okay? Yeah. Now, he said in his heart to deliver Daniel, but the problem with this, he thought about it. He said all the rest of the day, but there's no escape valve. There's no fine print in the contract. Once the decree is signed, it's signed, and there's nothing in the wording that he could find that would take care of that. Then these men assembled unto the king and said to the king, know, O king, the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree or statute which the king has established may be changed. They're telling him what he already well knows, and that's not going to set well with King Darius. Okay? Now, he's kind of painted himself into a corner, hasn't he? With the decree itself. But he is not happy with these advisors. He's not happy with himself either. He says, then the king commanded, they brought Daniel, cast him into the den of lions. The king spoke unto Daniel and said, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Now, we'll talk about that in a moment. A stone was brought, laid upon the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet, the signet of his lords. That's two different signets. Okay, one for him and one for the people that were accusing Daniel, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Just some observations here. Okay, that first off, honoring God was the priority in Daniel's public service, as well as his private worship. He simply wasn't going to back off. He wasn't going to say, well, when I'm in public, I'll act this way, and when I'm in private, I'll be a good Christian guy. He was committed to honoring God in both areas. In verse 10, it says, of course, just like he did before, that political entrapment was insufficient. Daniel knew what these guys had set him up. It's got to be your conclusion. He understood the signing of the decree. He knew what it meant, and he knew where that decree came from. I mean, he's the top guy of the three. Come on. He knows what's going on politically. And he refuses to allow their schemes to entrap him into doing something that is not honoring God. Okay? He wasn't a fair weather Christian. Christian's a wrong term, of course. A fair weather friend of God, was he? He wasn't, well, when things are going my way, I'll pray, I'll go to church, I'll be involved in service. No, didn't make any difference. If all forsake me, I'm going to go ahead and honor him anyway. Doesn't make any difference to Daniel. That's his. Daniel could have easily avoided this trap. He could have shut the shutters, right? He could have gone into a secret room, right? We use the term prayer closet. You got to kind of watch out what your thought process is on that one. But he could have spray painted the windows. I said, no, he couldn't have probably done that. But he could have justified the fact of, well, hey, it's only 30 days. Big deal. I'll just pray silently inside myself for those 30 days, and that'll cover it. No, he just kept right on doing it. Okay, he's the Jewish guy, wasn't he? That's what verse 13 talks about. That Jewish guy. You can't trust him. He's not one of us. maybe they were attempting to convince Darius that he could justify throwing Daniel into the den because he wasn't really one of the locals. You know, he was an outside guy from the tribe of Benjamin or wherever he was from, okay, whatever. Okay. The implication says if he's a Jew, he's untrustworthy. Therefore, throw him in the lion's den because you don't need untrustworthy people in your administration. Political, you know, intrigue, justification, how to rationalize, redefine things. None of us in this day and age know anything about that, right? Notice here on this lion's den thing, of course the Jews stoned people to death. You know, crucifixion didn't come on the scene until the Romans came to power centuries later, and so forth. This being executed by wild animals was something the Medo-Persians took or participated in. And the construction, again, it's like a lot of things that you get out of Sunday school lessons. We probably don't have a real biblical view because we adopt the second grade picture, you know, in Sunday school instead of paying attention. This would have been a rather large enclosure, probably made out of stone or stone blocks. It could have been natural, but it would have had a door in the side that you could roll a stone in front of, but the top of it was open. Above the height that a lion could jump out of, the top of it was open so that spectators, people who were assigned to keep track of things or whatever, could view what was going on down in the den itself. And Daniel is placed into that. The stone is, you noted, was sealed by both the king's signet and the Lord's signet. This ensured that nobody was going to violate the king's command, you know, and that the lords were going to make sure that, doubly sure, if you want to look at it that way, that there wasn't some type of midnight rescue that came about. Okay? So they were trying to cover all the bets as well. Okay? Daniel's deliverance is found, of course, in the next few verses, and now we get into some of the fun stuff. Beginning here with verse 18, it tells us, the king went to his palace, passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him. His sleep went from him. He had a sleepless night. Okay? He knew that Daniel was a righteous man who had done nothing against the kingdom and was now very likely to be some type of food product in the belly of a lion. Okay? He spent a miserable night. He was worried about Daniel's fate. Yes, he also recognized, you got to conclude it, he recognized he'd been conned. You know? And by having his vanity appealed to, he'd essentially caused the death of an innocent guy who was very valuable in the sight of the kingdom. You know, a sleepless night. Kind of reminds you of Xerxes in the book of Esther. That for some reason couldn't sleep. For some reason, coincidence, had scrolls brought to be read to him, kind of like a lullaby. For some reason, they turned to the portion of the king's scrolls that had to do with Mordecai foiling a plot against the king's life. And just coincidentally, read the portion that said that he was supposed to be rewarded, Mordecai was, for doing this heroic deed, but that had never been fulfilled. and then winds up getting Haman, the Jew hater, involved. So you got to read the story on your own from there. How's that? In verse 20, it says, it kind of gives you the idea that in verse 19, that the king arose very early the next morning, went in haste to the den. When he came to the den, he cried out with a lamentable voice full of woe, and he says, Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God, whom you serve continually, able to deliver you from the lions? Let's face it, he was pretty much expecting not to hear Daniel respond. He was expecting to hear the burp of a well-fed lion, wasn't he? I mean, think about it. He really was. Now, he recognizes that Daniel's God maybe could actually deliver him. After all, he'd remembered the fiery furnace had been reported to him from Nebuchadnezzar's day. Okay, is this all actually faith? No, this is more of a questioning type of thing. The God you serve, he says, is your God. This has no personal relationship between Darius and the God of Israel. He's just wanting to know, is Daniel's God going to intervene at this point? Okay. So there's no tampering on the door down at the bottom. Now, if they can't get loose from the top because you've got guards patrolling the top of it. And Persian law indicated that the punishment had to be executed on the day of judgment. The day of judgment, of course, had been passed. Daniel had been thrown into the den the night before. What happens here? Well, deliverance. Daniel spent, or Darius, with his miserable night, and he is able, he says, I believe, Darius says, he's able to deliver you, but will he? Well, that's very similar to what you find in chapter 3. Okay? When the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are pulled in front of Nebuchadnezzar and says, our God is able to deliver us, but if he chooses not to do so, we're not going to fall down and worship your crummy pagan, idolatry in any case. Now they were a little more, sublime than that, I suppose, but you kind of get the idea. At the end of verse 20, he says, what is the question? What am I going to hear as I walk up to find out for myself? He doesn't even walk up and look down. He kind of calls out ahead of time, hoping against hope type of thing. What am I going to get? A satisfied lion, or am I going to hear Daniel? Okay. Well, verse 21 goes on and says this, then Daniel says to the king, O king, live forever. Yeah, notice there's no retribution, there's no bad attitude. Daniel recognizes that the king got conned, that this wasn't of the king's doing, this political intrigue, on a national basis wasn't, the king was maybe naive or foolish or not paying attention, but he doesn't hold it against the king. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths that they have not hurt me, inasmuch as before him innocency was found in me. And also before you, O king, I've done no hurt. Then was the king exceedingly glad and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. Notice they're taking him up. They are not breaking the seals. They're not moving the stone. They are leaving that sealed entryway on the bottom to prove to anybody who suggests that somebody snuck in there in the middle of the night and did something to protect Daniel. They are lifting him up from the top, letting down ropes, whatever, that's what it says here. And they took him up out of the den, And no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he had believed in his God. Okay? The seals remained undisturbed. You have to figure this is Darius that gave that order. Okay? On top of that, who wants to go into a den of hungry lions? You know, to try to rescue somebody? Just let down the rope and let Daniel grab it and we'll pull him up out of it, rather than go in and have to fight off lions and rescue Daniel at the same time. You see, that those seals were undisturbed, right? Anybody that might question Daniel's deliverance knew it had to be supernatural. It wasn't men going in there and rolling the rock away. Nope, not a bit. You see, repeatedly in these chapters of Daniel, you find God's sovereignty over the actions and affairs of men. Here, you've got even the animal kingdom is put on display. God can shut the mouths of lions. Okay? They were the king's executioners, the form of capital punishment utilized. The king's commands had been violated, and Daniel is delivered regardless of the king's decrees. Even over a death sentence, and thrown in, hooked up to the electric chair, head in the noose, spears poised to thrust them through. Doesn't make any difference. God is sovereign in the affairs of men. Well, the verse 24 kind of stands all by itself. It really does. It gives us the outcome of the plot, I suppose. The king commanded, and they brought those men that had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Apparently just threw them in from the top, not caring if they broke bones on the fall or not. And their children and their wives. And the lions, is a polite way of putting it, had mastery over them and broke all their bones in pieces or ever they came at the bottom of the den. They were hungry lions. And by the time they ricocheted off the walls, hit the rocks, before they ever even got to their feet, the lions were right on top of them. Must have been a pretty good bunch. By the way, because you've got families, wives, on the whole. By the way, this was normal in Persian culture. If somebody had a plot against the king, you just took out the whole family. That way you didn't have to worry about some kid growing up and 15 years later hatching some plot to assassinate the king when he wasn't looking. Okay? You just eliminated all possible future threat and called it good. Okay? Wow. I was thinking how our own national politics might be affected, if you found people that lied. Never mind. We won't go there. Okay. All right. Then you've got the king's declaration. Great declaration, but there's a sadness here. Okay. Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to the people, nations, languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men will tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion even unto the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, and has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Yeah. It's a tremendous declaration concerning God's sovereignty. But notice it is Daniel's God. Nebuchadnezzar said, my God. Here there's no personal faith. That's the sad part of this passage. Okay? It's the God of Daniel. The miracle was witnessed and proclaimed. But folks, miracles in and of themselves is not the requirement. Faith in God is the requirement. Okay? It's the God who does the miracles that's worthy of our worship, not the miracle itself. Okay? You have a lot of this. that end times, prophetical stuff, 2 Thessalonians 2, you've got the masses of humanity being deceived by the miraculous. Revelation 13 talks about, the end time false prophet that does all kinds of supernatural stuff, and people just bow down and take 666 in the back of their hand and worship the image of the beast, and on and on. A lot of parallels. We're going to be looking at some of them in the weeks ahead. Okay. Daniel, of course, it tells us in verse 28, prospered during the reign of Darius and Cyrus the Persian. That Daniel was honored and prospered. How long that was, we don't know. But once again, on display in a series of the first 6 chapters, a series of events, historical narrative of things that occurred with Daniel as the centerpiece. And God's sovereignty rules. Okay? It just looks like man's in charge, or man is the big shot, or man's in control, or man's got the biggest hammer, or the most money, or the ability to, pass laws and decrees, and shatter people's lives. And God says, no, you can't. Not unless I will it. Not unless I allow it. Not unless it's part of my overall plan, because I'm the one who holds the king's hand, and I will turn it whichever way I choose. Something to remember in troublous times. Let's pray. Father, thank you as we bow before you for blessing us richly with the first half of the book of Daniel. And even though the tone of the book changes and its focus becomes something significantly different in the next 6 chapters, we establish the basis here of you being sovereign in all things, whether they are historical events of the past in the life of Daniel, or whether they are those that are prophetical and awaiting fulfillment in the future. You are equally sovereign, and we can guarantee that they will come to pass as you have planned for your purpose and honor. In Christ's name, amen.